This video is a report to the thousands of teachers and students who have participated in this year's Adopt an Acre campaign. Since 1992, over 2 million acres of tropical rainforest have been preserved forever because of students and teachers from over 10,000 schools worldwide. This year, 2 very special places have been added to the list of rainforests protected.
Hi, this is Kurt Clemenson with the Earth Foundation here in the beautiful country of Guatemala. This is the site of this year's Adopt an Acre project. We're in the city of Antigua, which is just phenomenally beautiful. I'm here with one of my friends. We're going to be traveling around Guatemala, taking some fantastic video, and also, of course, visiting the site of this year's Adopt an Acre site.
Guatemala is located in Central America and is bordered by Mexico to the north, Belize and Honduras to the east, and El Salvador to the south. Guatemala was also the center of the ancient Mayan Empire. This kingdom was, of course, crushed by the invading Spanish conquistadors in the 16th and 17th century. In my opinion, this is probably the most fascinating story in the history of mankind, how a tiny group of a few hundred men could conquer whole countries of millions of Indians. A big part of their success was, of course, superior technology. The bows and arrows of the Indians didn't compare to the cannons and guns of the Spanish. And the use of horses also gave the Spaniards a huge advantage. Today, the highlands, or Altiplano, are still populated by the descendants of the Mayan. With its tropical latitude and mile-high altitude, the Altiplano is the land of eternal spring. Although we still see some pine forests, the landscape has given way to the small farms of the Mayan. Here we see the typical cornfields that provide the ingredients for tortillas, the staple food of the indigenous people. In fact, like almost everywhere else in the Third World, population pressures have meant that more and more farmers cut more and more of the forests. As the people run out of good land, they deforest the mountains. This is what I call a vertical cornfield. Imagine how difficult and dangerous it would be trying to plant and harvest a crop on this steep hillside. This is carbon, or charcoal in English. This is where the forests are going. People are cutting them down, they make this, it comes into town, it's used in cook stoves. And we need to come up with alternatives like solar energy or maybe natural gas in order to stop this. One of the most pertinent facts about Guatemala is that it is coming out of a 20-year civil war that killed 100,000 people, many innocent civilians. Another 40,000 disappeared and are presumed dead. Still another 250,000 people were forced to flee to Mexico, where they live in refugee camps. With the signing of the peace treaty last year, however, they are beginning to return home in large numbers. The challenge will be to provide jobs and land to these people without creating additional stresses on the ecosystem. The NGOs, or non-governmental organizations, supported by the Earth Foundation and the Nature Conservancy, are mindful of this and are helping teach intensive, sustainable cultivation techniques that can protect the environment while allowing people to grow their crops. Our tour of the Altiplano began in the city of Antigua. This was the first capital that the conquistadors established in Guatemala. Today, this colonial city is still breathtakingly beautiful. Giant bougainvillea and other tropical flowers thrive in the rich volcanic soil, climbing up over the surrounding walls. Behind these walls are beautiful homes, businesses, and hotels. For a little more than the cost of a room at Motel 6, we stayed in this charming old hacienda. Marimba music, which is popular throughout the country, filled the courtyard, entertaining the tourists and the parrots and macaws alike. Unfortunately, there are now more scarlet macaws in the hotels and restaurants than there are in the forests. Antigua is so well preserved that one can almost believe that you've been taken back in time, watching the driver of this carriage as he waits for a Spanish count or baroness. But the reality is that we are entering the 21st century. Behind these ancient adobe walls, you can surf the net or visit a modern dentist's office in this old mansion. The Spanish actually had to abandon Antigua and move their capital to Guatemala City after a series of severe earthquakes destroyed much of the city. Today, many of these magnificent churches, cathedrals, and chapels lie in ruins. Tourists are attracted, of course, to the old historical structures. And although it would cost far too much to restore them, steps are taken to protect them from deteriorating any further. Of course, there are a number of churches today that were not destroyed or were rebuilt, and the Catholic Church is still the center of many of the people's lives. During the past 2 decades, however, Christian fundamentalists have made huge inroads into Guatemala, converting a large percentage of Catholics to evangelicalism. Today we see the descendants of the European colonists on their way to school. The uniforms indicate that they are attending a private school. The uniform also indicates that these are the children of privilege. Unfortunately, in spite of the peace treaty, many of the social inequities that caused the Civil War have not been addressed. Good schools must also be provided for all children so that they're not on the streets shining shoes or selling fruit in the market when they should be learning to read and write. With the war over, though, the people are beginning to relax and enjoy life again. Yo-yos seem to be very popular. Just keep practicing, lady. Video games also seem to be huge here. And of course, as in so much of Latin America, soccer is a national obsession. From Antigua, we headed to the magical city of Chichicastenango. Every Thursday and Sunday, Mayan Indians stream into the city from the surrounding countryside for market day. And with the end of the war, tourists are also flocking back to the Altiplano. And it's easy to see why. The beautiful woven goods, pottery, and other handicrafts are an incredible bargain. Likewise, the culture, architecture, marketplace, and general exotic atmosphere provide photo opportunities of a lifetime, such as the smoke incense from copal burning that wards off evil spirits. After a morning of filming and Christmas shopping, our young guide Mario asked us if we were interested in seeing a shaman. Hiking up into the pine forest, we came upon this scene. In spite of 500 years of conversion by the Catholic Church, many of the Mayans still worship ancient idols. We were extremely lucky to be able to film this scene, as it'll probably disappear during the next few years. Driving through the mountains the next few days, we saw a number of picturesque little towns, each one anchored by the church and plaza. We also hiked in intact pine forests that are crisscrossed by clear mountain streams and rivers. Here we see the colonial city of Quetzaltenango with its beautiful Baroque architecture. If you ever wonder what happens to school buses in the U.S. when they get old, here's the answer. They're shipped to Latin America where they're used for mass transit. And again, soldiers seem to be everywhere still in spite of the peace process. Back on the road, we came across this beautiful scene. Imagine living in this small farmhouse with a giant waterfall as a backdrop. And of course, every few miles we spotted another perfect volcanic peak. That evening, as we descended the mountains into Panajachel, we saw the sun setting between 2 volcanoes on Lake Atitlan. Words could not do justice to the beauty of this scene. The next morning, we drove around the lake and saw the volcanoes in all of their splendor. The small Mayan villages along the lakeshore were every bit as picturesque as the Greek isles of the Mediterranean Sea. In the village of Santiago Atitlan, we filmed the weekly procession on its way to church. This village is famous for a number of reasons, including the fact that they were the first village to successfully remove the army. An army base had been established in the 1980s because of guerrilla activity in the area. In 1990, 2 drunken soldiers shot and killed a villager. When 2,000 villagers marched to the army base to demand justice, the soldiers opened fire and killed 13 people, including 3 children. After the incident, 20,000 villagers signed petitions calling for the expulsion of the army, and the base was shut down. It was a bright sunny day when we arrived back at Antigua. We could see smoke billowing out of one of the volcanoes that surrounds the city. I made up my mind then and there that I had to get to the top of one of these smoking giants. We've just climbed about 2,000 feet to the top of this volcano, and as you can see behind me, there are lava flows here, and that's where we're headed next to film. I've got a live lava flow maybe 50 feet behind me. My wet hair is dried in just seconds, and it feels like I'm standing in front of an open oven. You know, it wasn't until the next day that I realized that the rubber tips on our camera tripod and the soles of my shoes had completely melted from the intense heat of the volcano. Our next journey was to the Petén, a huge area bordering Mexico and Belize. 50 years ago, the Petén was an almost impenetrable rainforest. However, roads were constructed in the 1960s to open the forest for settlement, taking population pressure off the Altiplano. Sadly, half of the area has been deforested for farming and cattle ranching. However, the other half is still covered in rainforest. In fact, Mexico, Belize, and Guatemala have created a tri-national park called the Mayan Biosphere. This multi-million-acre region would protect a number of important ecosystems, including tropical lowland rainforest. The Petén is also home to the giant ancient Mayan city of Tikal. This model shows the sophisticated layout of the city, which was the cultural capital to millions of Mayan Indians.
We've just arrived in Tikal and pulled one of these out of a hole. This is a big tarantula. They're really beautiful creatures. They live to be 30 years old, and they're really warm and fuzzy.
Although a large part of Tikal has been excavated, we still see plenty of large trees in the forest, like this great kapok and this strangler fig tree.
I'm standing in the main plaza of Tikal in front of the famous Temple Number 1. This is probably the most photographed of all the ruins in the world other than the Egyptian pyramids.
You might recognize this place from the movie Star Wars, which used Tikal as a backdrop for one of its battle scenes. Apparently, George Lucas liked the view as much as we did. As you can see, looking out over the rainforest from the largest of the temples, Temple Number 4, there are still millions and millions of acres of rainforest stretching to the Mexican and Belizean border. As a result, we saw numerous animals and birds, including this toucan. This is the same bird you see on the Fruit Loops box. And this ocellated turkey, the brilliant metallic wing seems to be made from copper. I couldn't recognize this bird, but he sure was huge. There are also large populations of songbirds, and the Petén is a wintering home for many species of neotropical migrants that spend the summer in the United States. We also saw numerous mammals, including this fox, Aquatimundi, which is related to raccoons. And we also saw both species of monkeys found in the park, including the spider monkey and the howler monkey. Finally, it was time to take a look at this year's Adopt an Acre site. We have 2 Adopt an Acre sites this year in the country of Guatemala. Guatemala boasts a variety of ecosystems, including some of the largest tracts of rainforest left in Central America. Unfortunately, because of unchecked population growth, much of the country has already been clear-cut for agriculture and cattle ranching. One of the most biologically significant areas found in Guatemala is the Sierra de las Minas Mountains, which contain the largest cloud forest found in Central America. Cloud forests are very special ecosystems that are located at high altitudes. Most of the year they are covered in clouds and receive much of their precipitation in the form of mist. In cloud forests, we also find a high degree of endemism. Endemic species are species found only in that particular area. The golden toad, for example, was only found in the Monteverde cloud forest in Costa Rica. Unfortunately, it was last seen in the late 80s and is probably now extinct. Unfortunately, because of logging, agriculture, firewood gathering, etc., much of the cloud forests have disappeared during the past 20 years. Fortunately, we have an opportunity to save an exceptionally beautiful cloud forest while at the same time helping to improve the lives of a group of Mayan Indians. What we're going to do quite simply is buy land outside of the Cloud Forest Reserve and move the whole village of Vega Larga there to live in newly constructed homes. As is usually the case, our trip into the mountains would not be without pitfalls. We even had to repair a few bridges on the way in. This would be our last touch of civilization for a while. We'd leave the pickup, and from here it was a 5-hour walk to the village. We've just come out of the village of Chirasco, and we're headed up towards the cloud forest. We've come upon this. These are sweet gum trees that grow in the southern United States, and there's a forest of them right here in the foothills heading up towards the cloud forest. They're huge trees, really beautiful, and the difference between here and the southern United States is that these have bromeliads found in tropical rainforests growing on the trees. We've been hiking now for better than an hour out of the pine forest where we saw those gum trees down below. We've climbed about 1,000 feet. It's really humid in here. We are in the middle of the cloud forest, and it is just amazing. It kind of feels to me like the redwoods of California. This tree, I believe, is some kind of oak tree, maybe Spanish oak, and it's got a strangler fig growing on it. This is the fruit from the strangler fig, and of course this is very important to the monkeys, the birds, bats found in this area. Over here to my right is a tree fern, and this is a very old species that actually goes back to the time of the dinosaurs. Lots of fascinating plants in here, and we've got a couple more hours to hike to the village. I think we're going to see all kinds of exciting things. This tree was one of the many that we found that is a nest for the elusive quetzal bird. Worshipped by the Mayan and Aztec Indians, this beautiful bird has disappeared from much of its habitat from Mexico to Panama. However, in Sierra de las Minas, we saw plenty of them and estimate that as many as 2,000 could still be in the cloud forest. The quetzal is only one of almost 400 species of birds found in Sierra de las Minas. Even the extremely endangered harpy eagle is found here. Many neotropical migrant birds also spend the winter in Sierra de las Minas. Two birds in particular, the golden-cheeked warbler, which is found only in the hill country around Austin, Texas, and the scarlet tanager, found throughout the eastern United States, have been greatly reduced in numbers during the past few decades. As autumn approaches, both of these birds make a beeline directly to Sierra de las Minas, the only place that they're found during the winter. If we lose this rainforest, these two songbirds will in all likelihood go extinct. Estuardo Velázquez of Defenders of Nature, our partner in Sierra de las Minas, made the best find of the day, a giant scarab beetle. This tree is phenomenal. Again, I don't know what the species is, but look at the root system here. This thing has got to be at least 700-800 years old. Trees just don't get that old in most rainforests. They usually get up to about 75-80 years old, and a windstorm takes them down. This guy was here hundreds of years before Columbus. These ferns were so large that we felt like we were in the land of the giants. 63 rivers begin their lives in Sierra de las Minas. If this forest is destroyed, much of the water for agriculture in eastern Guatemala would disappear. As the morning wore on, the clouds began to cover the trees. This truly felt like an enchanted forest. We got some great footage of this spider monkey. There are 3 species of monkeys, the spider monkey shown here, and 2 different kinds of howler monkeys. There are also jaguars within the reserve's borders. The monkeys and jaguars are among more than 55 mammal species. Well, we finally made it. It took us about 5 hours to hike in here. I'm in the middle of one of the Mayan fields here. You can see that they grow 3 basic crops: corn, beans, and a type of squash. This has been the main diet for the Mayans for thousands of years. They grow a 4th crop. I don't know what the word is in English. It's called solo in the native language, and it's a type of vegetable that they use in their soup. They do, however, have to hike in with extra corn to feed their people because the land is so poor here. And although it's unbelievably beautiful, it's very challenging trying to live in here, and the people will be very happy to move further down the mountain. The slash and burn areas were established by the Mayan Indians who began to move into the cloud forest in 1983. The area cleared is only about 15 to 20% of the 3,600 acres that the Indians have received title to from the government. However, as the soil plays out, they cut more forest. The second impact of their presence here, of course, is the hunting of birds and mammals. As you can see behind me, this is why we call it a cloud forest. As the day wore on, we knew the rains would be hitting shortly. Within the hour, the downpour began. Imagine spending 10 months of the year in this daily deluge, and you can see why the Mayans were so willing to move. The next morning, the sky was again clear for a few hours. We had spent the night on the floor of the one-room schoolhouse and went off to explore the village after arising. We were amazed to see that in spite of such poverty, the Mayans had planted flowers to bring beauty into their lives. What a great bouquet for the dining table. We were also taken aback to realize that most of these folks spoke very little Spanish, and we needed an interpreter to discuss the details of the future move. The women had prepared a typical Mayan breakfast. Unfortunately, the open cook stoves coupled with a lack of ventilation causes serious respiratory health problems for the women and girls. I made certain that the new homes that they were moving to would have better designed stoves with adequate ventilation. They showed us their native crafts such as weaving and posed for the last photographs. The next leg of our hike would take over 9 hours, so we wanted to get as much of it done as possible before the afternoon rain soaked us. In addition, we would be following a little used path going up the mountain away from the village of Vega Larga. These little used steep paths meant we'd be cutting trails. The sight of these flowers indicated that there were plenty of hummingbirds in the region. This cactus certainly looked out of place in such a humid environment. We set up for lunch in this hut as the folks from Defenders of Nature explained that this was the location of their first action, getting the government to shut down illegal logging. These signs alert people to the fact that this is now a protected reserve and activities such as logging will not be tolerated. Our Guatemalan partners told us that the loggers did not take kindly to people stopping their operations, but it wasn't until later that we would discover just how dangerous environmental work in Guatemala really is. After lunch, we would again fjord a number of rivers on our way to the top of the mountains. The water was so clean that we could drink right from the stream. By day 3, we had made it to Defender of Nature's high mountain cabins. This would be our base as we continued to explore the cloud forest. The vegetation up here was again awe-inspiring. From one spot we filmed cactus, pine trees, bamboo, and bromeliads. All 4 of these plants are normally found in completely different ecosystems. The bamboo forest reminded us of China, where the panda bears live. A few days later, as we left the forest, we arrived at the picturesque farm of Don Carlos Mendez Montenegro. This simple coffee farmer was the one who actually began the effort to protect the forest from loggers back in the 1980s. As Don Carlos proudly showed us his hydro-powered coffee mill, we noticed his right hand was crippled. Later it was explained that it was the result of being shot in an ambush by angry loggers who also killed Don Carlos's son. After returning to the United States, we learned that these same criminals had burned the biological station where we had just been filming. As I looked out over the valley from Don Carlos's farm, I promised myself that I would do whatever it took to protect the last of the forest from these cowards. Fortunately, the government understands the need to protect this biological treasure house and is investigating these crimes. Finally, we crossed the last river and headed down the mountain to the site of the second Adopt an Acre site. We're now at our second location for the Adopt an Acre program called Cerro San Gil. And this is a lowland, humid tropical rainforest, completely different than the ecosystem, the cloud forest that we were in the last couple of days. You can see this is a typical rainforest tree with the giant buttress roots to support it in relatively thin soil. And we're going to spend the day walking through this forest, stopping periodically to film the different trees, the animals, the birds, etc. The following are typical rainforest plants: wild ginger, a couple of species of heliconia, cecropia, and many other beautiful plants. We also see palm trees, of which there are at least 30 species in this forest. This is called hot lips for obvious reasons and is used for a medicine that makes one vomit if they've swallowed poison. And countless species of fungus and mushrooms. Many plants have been producing seeds since this is the end of the rainy season, and they can thereby start growing very rapidly. There are also over 50 species of reptiles and amphibians, including this beautiful coral snake. And this venomous eyelash viper. We also see plenty of these guys, the industrious leafcutter ants, busily harvesting leaves for their underground gardens. I was very pleased to be interviewed by Pepe and Eileen, the stars of the Guatemalan hit TV program Green Generation, which is sort of like MTV meets the Discovery Channel. The young people of Guatemala were amazed and really inspired to learn that thousands of students and teachers in the United States were committed to helping protect the forests of Guatemala. Like Sierra de las Minas, Cerro San Gil is crisscrossed with numerous rivers that provide for agriculture outside of the reserve. After a hot, humid hike in the forest, we took advantage of this pure crystal pool to cool off. At the end of the day, we had the comfort of the new lodge built by our partner, the Foundation for Eco-Development and Conservation, or Fundaeco. The next morning, we arose to an incredible cacophony of bird sounds. At one time, Cerro San Gil also had significant populations of scarlet macaws. Sadly, they've disappeared due to over-harvesting for the pet trade. Our goal is to reintroduce the macaws as the area receives protected status. We're here with Marco Cereza, who's the director of Fundaeco. Marco, can you tell us what we're looking at here in this area?
Certainly. We're here at the foothills of Cerro San Gil in the Atlantic region of Guatemala. And what we have in Isabel is a series of large fragments of forested areas which are very valuable from the biological point of view. In our back we have Sierra Santa Cruz, which is a very valuable forest. Then we have Lake Isabel as we move east. At the end of Lake Isabel we have the Polochic wetlands, the very rich, diverse wetland with a lot of howler monkeys and manatees, very important area for manatees.
That's where the manatees are found.
That's right.
Great.
And then, if we keep on going east, we have Sierra de las Minas, and you can see a mountain chain coming toward us from Sierra de las Minas into Cerro San Gil. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect these two forested fragments through a biological corridor between these two mountain ranges.
So it's really important that we get these areas, Sierra de las Minas and Cerro San Gil, protected to serve as anchors for that whole project.
That's right. In fact, these two areas are now what we could call biological refuges. Once in the past, when the Central American mass was being formed, these mountains were probably islands, and they were biological refuges. That's why we have high levels of endemism, species that only exist in Cerro San Gil and Sierra de las Minas. Right now, these forests are again mountain refuges because man has destroyed forests between them. So what we want to do is protect the remaining habitats and then join them through a biological corridor.
Well, we're going to try to do everything we can to raise money through Adopt an Acre to make that happen.
Well, thank you very much.
You bet. And which animals are they? Well, let's just take a look at a few that we filmed during our visit. last day, we took a boat ride into the port where we could see forest growing right to the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. These waters are home to the endangered manatees. However, because they're so shy, we weren't able to see any the day we were out. We were blessed, however, to spot these dolphins in front of the Adopt an Acre site. Now, I'm not superstitious, but it sure seemed like a good omen, almost like they were coming in to thank us for doing our part to protect the natural world. As I think about the rainforest and coral reefs, I must admit that I'm struck by the immensity of the job ahead of us to protect these priceless, fragile treasures. At the same time, I'm optimistic that we will save much of what remains if we all just continue to do our part. Now, in a few weeks, I'll be leaving to visit possible sites for next year's Adopt an Acre and Rescue the Reef campaigns, and when I return, your Earth Foundation representative will contact you with that information. We look forward to working with your school again next year. Remember, it's only through your participation that we're able to save these very special places. From all of the folks at Earth Foundation and the Mayan families of Vega Larga who will soon have new homes, and of course all of the creatures on our planet, we'd like to say thank you. We look forward to working with your school again this next year as we race to save the most important, beautiful places left on our planet. And I want to add that you too can visit the rainforest on an eco trip of a lifetime with the Earth Foundation. You and your teachers can receive information by contacting us at our 1-800 number.